Well, good afternoon. I'd like to call this session to order. This is the beginning of a conversation at this campus among our faculty on undergraduate education at the University of Texas. My name is Greg Fenves. I'm the Executive Vice President and Provost, so many of you I know or recognize, but as you all know, I'm relatively new in this role after having served as Dean of the College of Engineering for the past 5 years. This is, I think, going to be a very interesting and a session and a beginning of an exciting process that President Powers and then I will talk about. But we're going to try to go through some prepared remarks fairly quickly so that we can really open it up to a conversation among the faculty. And now I can see where students learn the behavior to sit in the last rows of the classroom, because that's exactly what's happened as this room filled up. So I'd like to call up President Bill Powers to give some opening remarks and a charge for this campus conversation.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Greg. As Greg said, we intend this meeting to not really start. There has been a lot of conversation on the campus about undergraduate education for a long time, dating all the way back to the Commission of 125 and before that. But to sort of continue and give a charge that we need to be talking about these things. So it is the beginning of a sort of new phase of the conversation about how undergraduate education on this campus, how we ought to go forward. And as I said, this goes back to the Commission of 125 at least. Remember, they, in their first recommendation to the campus, talked about sort of recharging undergraduate curriculum. It started in the core curriculum, but it's certainly gone far beyond that. And a lot's been done along those lines. We have the signature courses, where every freshman comes in and gets a faculty member on an important topic. They have to do a lot of writing. They're in small groups. That, by the way, among the students, among the parents, among alumni, and around the country, people are quite astonished that we pulled that off. I think it's been a tremendous development. The flags, sort of making sure that people have the certain kinds of experiences, we're about finished building those out, but there'll be discussion of that for a long time. The undergraduate studies. And again, these will all evolve, but I think we've accomplished a lot on the campus. But remember, for those of you who are here back in those days, there was a long campus discussion about that, and sometimes a lot of disagreement about that. And we went through that both with the commission and then the task force, and then it went to faculty council, and there was a lot of debate on the campus. And we came out the other end, I think, with a very good set of solutions. But it worked only because the campus and the faculty and the students got involved in that conversation. And that's what we're here to do, is kick off, hopefully, a new conversation about what I think are some very important issues. And as you all know, there's been a tremendous focus on technology. And how is technology going to transform the way we deliver undergraduate education? Online courses, MOOCs, but a whole variety of technology. And that's not new. We've been using technology in the classroom for a long time, how to use it effectively, how it fits into the value proposition of what we think a research university and undergraduate residential education ought to be like. And that is going to be the key, in my view, to this conversation. What are the opportunities for having some of these technological advances, interactive online courses, blended and online courses, other technology in the classroom, doing it where those opportunities exist, consistent with the soul of a major world-class research university, And a point that we need to remember, a residential university. That is where people are learning together in ways that in class and outside of class, they're learning so much because they are spending time with each other and with us on the campus. So that's the conversation that we want to focus on. There has been a lot that's gone on in the last 3 or 4 years. As you have noticed, there is a major political debate about this. A political debate about why don't we just cut costs by going fully online, and then, well, no, we have to do things the way we've done. What we'd like to do is think, yes, consistent with what the soul of a great research and residential university, but what are the opportunities where we can actually develop some of those opportunities because there are some technological tools. That's the conversation we want to start. And as I said, it's been going on for 3 or 4 years. You know, we have a network of other flagship universities around the country that we talk to. They're going through the same kinds of soul-searching issues. We have a statewide network. How are there ways, for example, in developmental education or on-ramps for students coming in that we can work with community colleges and regional universities? There have been changes that Greg is going to talk about in how our students are consuming education. It is already the case that they're taking a lot of courses elsewhere and then transferring them in, both in high school and dual credit and on other campuses, and many of them online. That's a challenge that we have. And then there are technical issues about having common platforms that different colleges here can share, but also where we can be interactive with MIT and Michigan and Wisconsin and Berkeley and places like that. So there has been a lot going on. But we've gotten to the point where there are a lot of flipped classrooms, there's a lot of technology, where it's more than just prototypes, but we need to start asking how can we actually, and to what extent, can we actually use this to transform and make more valuable undergraduate education here on the campus. And to do that, I think we have to do a lot of soul searching on what is the value proposition. Why come to UT? What do our students get when they walk across that stage and graduate that we want to make sure they have? What are we trying to do? And then how can we look at our undergraduate education in a way that best produces those results? So it's not just how to do it. We have to spend a lot of time. What is really valuable that we want to do? We talk a lot about leadership. Are we going about teaching or giving leadership experiences in a way that actually does produce that result when students walk across the stage? And it's critical thinking and writing and communications and all of those. So we have to be thinking on the campus and on the faculty, what is it that we really envision when our students complete their 4 years here? You may remember about 6 months ago, I put out some principles that I believe in. It doesn't mean you need to believe in them. I think they're good principles, but those will be in flux as well. But one of them that I think ought not be in flux is when we get to curricular issues and what should be the set of experiences that our students have so they have the characteristics and properties when they walk across the stage at graduation. The faculty owns that process. The faculty owns the curriculum. Now that's a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. And that really is the genesis of this starting this conversation. That is, we need the faculty to really be thinking about this in the same way they did when we were talking about the core curriculum after the commission of 125. It's to start that process. Greg will be talking about it being a process. We don't mean just it's a conversation today. We do not have the answers today. We have questions, but we need to start, and there is a plan to start a year-long conversation so we come out of it the same way we did when we talked about the core curriculum, so we have some kind of collective sense of where we're going. That is the faculty's responsibility. Let me just say a few more things that I hope this conversation will keep in mind. Not just today, but as we go through the year, and frankly, this will be a decade-long transformation and continuing transformation of how we teach our undergraduates here. Most of the debate so far has been how should an individual course be offered? Should it be offered online? Should it be offered in a big lecture? Should it be offered in a small discussion group? Should it be offered in a flipped classroom? And there are, by the way, many very successful examples of using technology in flipped classrooms where people are more interactive in the class rather than listening to lectures. It works in some areas. Lectures work in other areas. But in the individual classroom, those are important issues. But by and large, that's up to the individual faculty member. Sort of what books are you going to assign? How are you going to structure your lectures? Are you going to use a flipped classroom? Are you going to have part of it be an online or internet experience? That really is in the purview of the individual faculty member. I think those are important issues, and we can learn from each other about how things work. And I think that'll be part of the conversation. But there are other issues that really affect us collectively, and that's where the faculty, not just in faculty council, not just at discussions like this, but we hope you'll go back to the departments, right? It's the departments, it's the history department that figures out what's the degree requirement for history or electrical engineering or whatever it is. So we hope these discussions will start going on in the departments, and solutions in one department may be different from solutions in other departments. For example, a lot of people have talked about a second signature course, or for years, people have talked about capstone courses, a senior course where people are using materials that they've learned to solve a particular problem. And there are a lot of those going on the campus and in seminars. Well, you need the people power to be able to do that. So maybe we can do things a bit differently in some of the gateway courses to free up some resources for faculty to be doing those kinds of courses. Well, that depends on what's the vision in the departments of what kind of end experience, what kind of characteristics we want in our graduates when we leave. That's something that the departments and the faculty in the departments have to figure out. And there are new kinds of experiences, not just new kinds of technology, but new kinds of experiences we might think about. And I want to just throw a couple out. Not because I think these are particularly good ideas, but to sort of get people to think outside the box on what this enterprise is about. Right now, the issue is, will Chemistry 301 be offered in a lecture or be offered in a flipped classroom with technology? As I said, that's an important question for the people doing Chemistry 301. But there are all kinds of other experiences that some of this technology might be able to allow us to use, maybe get a bit out of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday kind of credit hour time frame. And so let me just throw out a few maybe crazy sorts of ideas. We talk a lot about leadership. I'm not very enamored for somebody lecturing on principles of leadership as being the best way to teach leadership. People learn things by doing them and then reflecting on them. It might be possible to use technology to have students who are in, whether it's student government or student organizations, but in leadership positions, wrap a course around that, interactive with technology and exercises as they reflect on that experience that they go through. That's something that would be very hard to do in our without the technology. Maybe that'd be a good way to teach leadership. Maybe it's a credit that they get. Maybe it's 2 credits. Or, again, just an example, art history. Somebody's going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or maybe they're going to be over the summer in Europe. They go to 7 museums and wrap some art history around that they take through. That might be a very valuable educational experience for them. And I say might, right? This is up to art history to figure out. In geology, so you're driving out over summer break to El Paso or wherever, and you, instead of going nonstop, you zigzag through and take 3 or 4 days and visit some geological formations or maybe historical sites. And there's something wrapped around that technologically. Now, those may be good ideas, they may not be good ideas. But the point I want to make is I hope the conversation won't just be, does chemistry or psychology 301 work better in a flipped classroom or not? That really is going to be up to the faculty member using it. But to really ask, what do we want our students to have? What characteristics? We talk a lot about it, but are we giving them the experiences so they have those when they graduate? So I like this and hope that this conversation will be as much about going back in every department and thinking, what do we want at the graduation end? And think, how can we be designing the experiences for our students? Experiences they're already having, like Chemistry 301, but other kinds of experiences that we could not have given them 15 years ago, but that some of this technology might be able to give them that today. And if we look at it that way, I think we really will be taking a leadership role in American higher education of asking first the question, what is the soul of a research residential university? And then looking at all the tools we have, how can we best move to give our students that kind of experience? So I want to thank you all for being here. Spread the word. It's not just the people in this room. I hope we will go through a year and beyond of seriously asking how we ought to be designing undergraduate education here on the campus. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you, but thank you all for participating.
Okay, thank you, Bill. That was a great introduction. I'm going to probably talk too fast, so I will try to restrain myself. We have a tremendous university here, and research universities like UT Austin, really the genius in them is trying to do 3 things at the same time in ways that work together. Our undergraduate education mission, we have fabulous graduate programs, and of course the research that are done by our faculty and students. And that really has been the genius of American higher education. And there really are not that many universities, especially at our size, who do this well. But this is also the critique. It is a complex mission. It's 3 different goals. 3 different constituencies. How do you measure success in those 3 areas? And that really has been the modern challenge for American research universities. But I really believe that undergraduate education is firmly enmeshed in our other missions of graduate education and research. And that is what I would like to see come out of this conversation of how do we do that even better. And as Bill said, when a graduate walks across the stage with the handshake and the diploma, do we want them to be an educated citizen, understand the human condition, a productive member of society, ready for a professional degree, to be a leader at some point in their career? Well, those are the kind of questions we need to answer, and it's probably all of them, and probably others that I haven't thought of. But you think about them, the faculty thinks about them, but how are we methodically channeling those goals in undergraduate education into the education itself linked to our other important missions? Now, about every week I get a new book that is a critique of this mission. It's a critique of what you do and what we all do at the University of Texas. It's too expensive. Debt burdens are too high. We're in an educational bubble. Students aren't learning anything. They can't get jobs after they graduate. No end to the criticism of higher education. Now, some of it is justified. Some of it isn't, I believe, and we've not done a good job in responding to it. But this is not just a Texas problem. We're familiar with the context in Texas. It is a national and actually a global problem. But in the U.S., public higher education is really being challenged. And it is our responsibility to rise to those challenges and actually make education really, really valuable. And we've been doing it for a long time at UT Austin. As Bill mentioned, the Commission of 125 set a very simple goal, but with a lot of important guidelines about how to achieve that goal in improving undergraduate education. And just that list along the slide, the formation of the undergraduate studies program, the signature courses, the flags, the focus on graduation rates, providing better pathways for our students to graduate, the role of technology, lots of experimentation taking place, lots of innovation being incorporated into our curriculum. Experiential learning, many examples of this from the Freshman Research Initiative and College of Natural Sciences to international programs to prepare students to be successful in a global environment. Working with better articulation with the community colleges and even the high schools from programs like On-Ramps. So all of these innovations are taking place. And how do we gather what works really well, and apply those at a very large scale that we operate at? But these are the challenges I've mentioned. We're under pressure to justify the value of education as the cost to students and their families has gone up. We are criticized, I believe, very unjustifiably in not having the right balance between education and research. And UT Austin is far ahead of this than many other public flagship universities. But how do we integrate better the undergraduate education role that we have with our very important research role? But the model is changing very dramatically. And this is another important context that I don't believe existed when the Commission of 125 was looking at this and the Task Force on Undergraduate Education. Students are increasingly transferring credits to their degree at UT Austin. And in Texas, we have no control over that. We are required to transfer credits in the core curriculum. And I'll show some numbers in just a moment. Nationally, what we're seeing is the idea of a credit, the idea of a degree, the idea of a course, the idea of a degree and a curriculum are becoming unbundled. They're becoming separated. And this is a trend that I think will continue. Part of it is cost pressure. Some of it is pedagogy. Just an interesting side note. We're starting a medical school. You might have heard about it. And it's really interesting looking at the first year MD education. It is unbundled. There's no such thing as a semester credit hour. There's almost no such thing as a course. There are no lectures. It is all flipped classrooms. That is medical education today. Okay. Now, granted, these are small classes, 50 students, very expensive. But if you think about that kind of educational delivery to very, very talented students in very demanding fields with a knowledge base that's almost impossible to learn in 1 year of preclinical work, we should be able to think about how to do this for our undergraduate program. And I think the real disruption in higher education is not technology. The real disruption is going to be competency-based education, where students are getting certificates or degrees by testing out on competency. And that is a trend that's going to continue to occur, and we're going to start seeing it, I suspect, in some of the courses that students are transferring into UT Austin. So just a couple numbers, 64% of our undergraduate students were enrolled at another institution in some form before coming to UT. This includes freshmen, well above the median for the flagship AAU universities. We are transferring in about 80,000 classes a year. These are classes that we are not teaching. They're being taken, as Bill said, at community colleges, dual credit courses. Some are online courses. We are required to transfer those in. And Austin Community College is by far the biggest feeder, but it's focused on a few really key general education courses, U.S. history, I think algebra is one of those, many of the introductory courses. We don't have quality control over those courses. And so as Bill introduced this conversation, this is really how do we define the questions that we can answer to add the value to what we provide our students, which is a residential education at a top-ranked research university. We've made great progress. The context and the environment continues to change, and we need to continue to look at this. So as I start to think about how we do this, I separate it out into 4 categories. One is the knowledge that we need our students to understand, how we deliver that knowledge, the pathways that students have through their degree, and what is unique to the residential education is the experience that they have when they're doing it in the classroom, in their major, and at the university. So I probably have too much information here, but the knowledge is our faculty, over 2,500 faculty, tenure track faculty, non-tenured faculty that are dedicated to our teaching mission and that are involved in the research. And that's the advantage our students get learning from the faculty that are creating the knowledge base. The delivery is, the standards have been lecture courses, laboratories, seminars. The pathways, we have over 110 different degree majors. Some of them are quite complex. We have lots of certificates, bridging programs. It is not unusual for students to graduate here with 130, 140, 150 units because of the opportunities they have here, but also the complexity of the pathways. And lots of different experiences. I outlined a few: honors courses, international study, even athletics is an important experience at UT Austin. So how do we organize this? How do we think about it? How do we deliver it to our students for high-quality undergraduate education? So I've just listed a bunch of questions, and these are really too many questions to go over in this brief introduction. These are really questions that the faculty should be asking about particularly how we integrate the knowledge creation in our research and graduate education missions into undergraduate education. I think the question of technology is actually probably the easiest question to answer. We sort of know how to go about doing it. These are faculty decisions. These are program decisions about what is the best way to employ technology in an individual classroom, in an individual course. Now, I do think that as we start to do that, we need to be able to take advantage of the size of our university and leverage advantages of scale in technology. Maybe think about other students we should be serving as a result of doing that. Perhaps high school students in dual credit. Perhaps working with community colleges better so that they can benefit from our faculty when they're taking courses from community colleges. How do we improve the pathways so students have understandable, perhaps predictable, plannable pathways through their degree program? We have some very complex degrees, as I mentioned. Are these really serving the goals of undergraduate education as we think about them more broadly? And I think the big issue is a set of questions of how do we take advantage of this tremendous experience for the 4 years, we hope, our undergraduate students have to experience UT Austin, something that will change their lives forever because of what they've learned in their courses, what they've learned from the faculty, from their fellow students in the entire experience of being a successful undergraduate here at UT Austin. Now, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, which primarily represents liberal education at all kinds of colleges and universities across the United States, did a very interesting survey of what do employers want from baccalaureate holders. And this shouldn't be surprising. They want problem-solving skills. They want the ability to analyze a problem using evidence. They want students who have solved an open-ended problem as part on a project, preferably in a collaborative team. They want students who have had some experience as an intern or providing some type of service. And they want evidence of collaboration. This is what employers across the spectrum, all types of employers, from baccalaureate degrees, which are primarily liberal arts degrees, this is what they are looking for. Well, this shouldn't be surprising. This is what we want our graduates to be able to do. And the questions are we preparing them to do this? And so these experiences, coupled with a liberal education, I think truly can prepare our students to be leaders. And we need to see many, many examples. But we need to see about 8,000 examples every year walking across that stage. And so we have great resources. The faculty are our biggest resource, great ideas about how we can prepare students for this education. And so the transformation doesn't start now. It started with the Commission of 125. It probably preceded that with just the culture here at UT Austin. But this is a time, particularly with the pressures American higher education is facing, but all the assets and all the resources we have here, we can really lead the nation in creative, effective solutions to undergraduate education. And so this is a beginning of the conversation. And the end is not even in May 14th, where we're going to have a symposium. We're going to have several sessions listed up here on March 6th on technology, March 24th on residential education and the experience, April 14th, what do we want the graduate to, what skills and capabilities do we want our graduates to have? And finally, we're going to conclude this beginning part of the conversation with a symposium on May 14th on the transformation of undergraduate education. Not the solutions, really what are the goals and the questions that we need to answer. And then I want to work with the president, with the deans and the departments, and the faculty to think about what is the right process that we can begin to answer those questions in the next academic year. So it's a very slow process. Things happen, change happens slowly. It should happen slowly because these are really important decisions that we're contemplating. And so we need to have the conversation, we need to have the input, we need to have the debate, because there is not going to be one answer to any of these questions, and a very deliberative, well thought out process to come up with a set of recommendations that we would hope that the departments and the programs will be able to act on after we go through this process. So those are my opening remarks. That's how I look at where we are at this very early stage of this form of the conversation. I'm glad we've left some time because this is really, we want to hear from you, your questions, your ideas as we prepare the path forward along this process. So I'm going to call Bill up, and we're going to just sit up here and take questions. So who's first?
Just like class, nobody will, there you go.
Okay, yeah, Ken.
And can I just, as he's getting the microphone, thoughts and suggestions on some of the things we talked about, but also how to go forward with this conversation would be helpful as well.
Well, very stimulating comments. Thank you for them. As we think about the undergraduate education, the characteristics we would like to see our students graduate with, I think it can be useful to consider what are the characteristics that lead to success in their subsequent careers. And there's a lot of models for that, but one that I think is widely held that I personally subscribe to is there are two primary characteristics that can really drive success in whatever kind of a career somebody decides to pursue. One is to have a good level of competency in whatever their area is. UT has long, as do other universities, emphasize in our curriculum, imparting a high level of competency to the students. As Greg pointed out, this is a lot of competition for competency-based education, and we need to improve on that. A second characteristic, which probably is equally important, is personal character. And I, in my own observation, being here more than 40 years now, see very little structure in the educational experience that students have for developing their personal character, actually at a time in their lives when that is being formed at one of the highest rates that they're going to experience until they become matured toward the end of their 20s. So to me, as we consider the undergraduate education, how it could be transformed, it would seem here is a real opportunity that we can make a difference, and we can make a difference in a way that is probably unique to a residential educational experience and perhaps at a top level university. And so personally, I think it would be very helpful to consider this dimension of the educational experience of the students.
Thank you. Let me, I think there'd be a lot of agreement, maybe not uniformity, that success in life, whether it's in career or a satisfying and successful life, that character is going to be an important part of that. And hopefully that kind of education or experience has begun long before people come here, but we can contribute to that. And let me just, maybe mundane, but I think important example. You're in the third grade and you get invited by the neat crowd to go have lunch with them, and they start bad-mouthing your old friends. Do you stick up for them or not? And we all failed that at some point, and we all were proud we went home at some point and succeeded. So, and you see people in the professions or in business or in education where lack of that gets in the way of not just professional success, but overall success. So the key, I think, is then, are there ways we can give students experiences that will advance them along those lines? And one of them could just be live life on the campus, and you'll run into these experiences and we'll give you credit for that, right? Well, that's not doing our job. But I think we now have the opportunity for people in experiences like that to, as they're going through a semester, learn some psychology, learn some sociology, do some exercises. So it's, are we at a point where we can start thinking about how to give our students structured experiences like that may not just be lectures in the classroom. So that's kind of one of the things I was referring to earlier. So this gives us an opportunity to think through that kind of question. Let me just say one other thing about it. People need to learn their field, right? People absolutely need to learn their field. If they're going to be an engineer, they need to know differential equations, and they have to have that skill. If they're going to, be historians, they need to know some history. So very often it gets, is that kind of experience better than learning 17th century French history? I hope people will look at this as sort of an ecosystem. I don't think we're going to get to the point where people aren't doing a lot of book learning around here. It's, can we, in the overall mix of what our students go through, think about adding some value-added experiences like that that'll get at the kind of result you're looking at.
As folks were trying to complete mentally the sentence, I hope our students will graduate with, I wanted to put a period right there and say, I hope our students will graduate.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but be reminded of the summit that you were at, President Powers, at the White House, and thinking about access and success in higher education. And I hope that this reinvention process will cause us to think broadly about what are the current barriers in the system that we currently have. And a lot of that involves stakeholders that are outside the university as much as inside the university, the mismatched expectations of the public, of families who insist on their students having to do biology because that equals being a doctor someday, or just the host of their understandings about what higher education is. It's an opportunity to engage the public very broadly about what our role is once we come to that. But I hope that that becomes part of the process, because that mismatch seems to me one of the principal barriers right now.
Yeah, I think we also need to educate the students as part of the information about what it means to consider pursuing a degree at UT Austin. Once they get here, I think there's been a lot of progress in orientation to prepare students to be successful academically, but to understand better what the goals are of the education that they're pursuing.
Yeah. There is no doubt a lot of external forces that, it's easy to say we can't control. You're suggesting we can work on helping control. I agree with that. But, we are in we don't have infinite degrees of freedom to design things. There are expectations that the students have that external forces have. And I fully agree we ought to work on them. But one of the things that helps that, and in this statewide coalition that we have, we're working with community colleges and other flagship four-year colleges, regional colleges. We do have policymakers come to those meetings. And so one of the projects we're working on are on-ramp courses for broader access students coming in. Everyone comes in with a flat spot. We're starting to think, if not that you didn't have Algebra 2, it's that you didn't do logarithms very well. So more modularized. By the way, if they're more modularized, almost every student that comes in, wherever they went to school, might take 2 or 3 of them. Other students might take more of them. It makes it easier to do that. But when these policymakers come in and see us tackling these problems, it actually helps the environment that we're in. We get more degrees of freedom. Policymaker after policymaker, legislators walk away saying, you guys are really thinking about this, and we're going to give you some space to do it. So one way to increase our degrees of freedom on these external forces is actually to be seen as, in sincere ways, trying to tackle some of these problems.
Okay, yeah, let's go in the back.
This is Michael Weber from Mechanical Engineering, and maybe I'll stand something in the back. I had the opportunity to teach a MOOC in the fall, and I think it's important we talk about the impacts on the students, but there are impacts on the faculty. The first impact, it was a ton of work to create the MOOC, so it was like 8 months. It was a lot of sweat equity with a team of many people. The second impact is I think it made me a better teacher. I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out in a year or so. But it forced me to think more carefully about how I'm teaching, because the technology of capturing what we're going to teach through a MOOC or online, whatever it is forever. And so I think I gave my work more scrutiny than the loose stuff I might have said in class before it was recorded on video. Not that I was imprecise before, but anyway, I thought about it more scrutiny. it forced me to be more global. I had a global audience. I had to think about not just the Texas perspective or the UT perspective or the national perspective, the global perspective. So first of all, the first impact is a lot of work for faculty. Second impact, I think it makes us better. I think I became a better teacher through it. At least I hope that's true because my wording was more global and more precise. The third impact is now I've got really good materials to use for my class from now on. I've got a digital textbook I can use, so that's good news. So there's some bad news, the upfront work. The good news is I think I'm more prepared to teach the class and I've got better tools. So this is good for us to have the orientation on the students. I just want to make that comment that there's a faculty impact here as well. But I think it's on balance good for us if we're willing to do it, and I appreciate the support from the tower to get that MOOC done. I think it's important we have those experiments, so I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you.
Juan?
Yeah, Juan Miro from the School of Architecture. I think that somehow it has been addressed in the comment before, but I just wanted to emphasize that it feels like when we describe ourselves as a residential research university, I feel that we have not seen the word public in the presentation in a way that I think is a very inherently part of our soul when we talk about as an institution. And I think in a way, the way this conversation can be framed, the way you have referred, Bill, to the exterior powers or exterior forces, it looks like we need to remind ourselves, for better or for worse, we're a public university. And I think it's important to make that clear in this conversation. Do we have to do things differently because we are a public university? Do we have to operate in a different way? But I think that we cannot forget that in a way in that conversation, because it's something that it is there. We are operating more and more like private universities on the one hand, but we have also the public side of what it means to be an institution that is called a public university. And I think that it's important to make that part of the conversation.
I think I was watching Greg's presentation, and one of the slides actually, I don't think you repeated the words, but it's public research university. When I first became president, I said, we really ought to be the best public research university in the country. And, you get there, it goes over time. We're right there. But I got a lot of people said, why public? Why not just the best university? And my answer was along your lines. There is something about being a public university. We interact with a variety of very legitimate stakeholders in different ways. But I think the answer is yes and no, right? The physics we do here ought to be as good as the physics they do at Harvard. But there may be certain kinds of programs we have, whether they're outreach programs or service programs or getting our students into kinds of experiences that can be very educational along the lines that we've been talking about. We are a public university. So I think you're right on that. But it doesn't mean, well, the only really good physics departments are going to be at the private university, so we ought to settle for second best on that. So there are differences in the mission, but when I'm in a classroom at the law school, I think there's not much of a difference between how I want that class to work between a public and private university. Maybe the experiences that the students have would be different, but I think we need to take all that into account.
Let me say a few words. I strongly believe in the public mission of universities like UT. And we pay a lot of attention to that. The questions of accessibility, affordability are really core to our public mission of providing access to students across Texas. The public evaluates the impact that we have, whether it's the parents of our students or future students, non-parents who sometimes have no idea what the university does. We don't do a great job of explaining why it's important to them. And certainly to the policymakers and the elected officials. We have a very public role in the state of Texas. And that's a core part of what we do. But you also got the other part of it too. We are operating more like a private university because the public funding component is being replaced by student tuition. It's really a private funding mechanism. And so that way of how do we operate more like a private university, depending on tuition and philanthropy and outside grants, is a change in our business model over time. And certainly with the quality of the work that our faculty do in research and teaching should rival the best private universities. Yeah, Ellen. Ellen?
Hi, Lorenzo Sadun, Mathematics.
I'm sorry, can't see through the light.
I want to echo the comments of our engineering friend, basically the joy of working on some of these innovative projects. I mean, I've been involved in making online materials that we're using we've used in 6 different flipped classes in the math department, and my videos have been seen in 168 countries around the world. But your army of educational innovators isn't getting paid. You have spoken of supporting and rewarding faculty, but in practice that's been trumped by the statement that the top priority of the university is recruiting and retaining top research, and the instructions to use merit increases strategically. And in practice that means that hotshots who threaten to leave the university can get generous retention packages, but the rest of us basically are ignored. And in my own case, it meant that all the educational stuff that I did counted for exactly nothing in my latest annual review. And I don't think that my experience is unique. The rank and file faculty provide a lot of the energy and creativity behind educational reform, and we get very little credit or recognition for it. And the non-tenure track faculty provide even more energy and creativity, and they get even less credit and recognition. And this is a very distressing state of affairs. I mean, it's very hard on morale to keep on working on something that is intrinsically extremely satisfying, and I think we can all agree is extremely worthwhile, when your work is basically treated as if it's not worthwhile. And I hope that you can change the tone in the university so that work of this sort is truly recognized and rewarded, because right now it isn't.
Yeah. Let me just comment on that. I think you're raising a core, critical, important point. Organizations, educational organizations, governmental organizations, business organizations, whatever. If you let your reward structure get out of sync with your vision of where you want to go, you're not going to get there. So there's the salary and promotion reward structure. I will say, I think teaching's a way bigger part of that than it was 10 years ago and 20 years ago, but I take the point. There's time to work on these. There are the intangible sort of way to go sorts of things that happen in departments. Departments have to value this kind of work, and so the rewards need to go back to departments and people that are doing them. I think this is that's a long way of saying I think that's a very important point you're raising. Now, it is also the case that research is a very important part of this. We pay lip service to that balance. Part of, remember that my comment to, now the thing is, if that's what you want your students to do, it's getting structures and classes to implement it. I think getting structures to give the right kinds of reward structures to getting this job done, I think will be important. When we went to the signature courses, people have talked about teaching an innovative course. And it doesn't have to be technology. A faculty member who structures a course around some kind of service learning project, they find that rewarding, right? Thinking through how you're going to give your students better experiences is a rewarding project. But then we need the kinds of reward structures that support that. Absolutely. The faculty who teach the signature courses, that started out as the freshman seminar program. I actually taught one. I was a dean at the time, and the provost thought it would be a good idea to teach one. My reward structure, that is not getting banged, okay, I'll go teach one. It was an overload. That program was a terrific program. It died. Now, this isn't a full answer to the individual faculty member that you're talking about. I take that point. But now, the current signature courses, which everybody that teaches them, almost everybody that teaches them, say it was transformative to them as well as to the students. But the department gets paid for that, right? In other words, it's not like, well, somebody has to go do it on an overload. That's a move, not a full move along the points you're making, into getting the reward structures in line with what we're trying to accomplish. So I think this is a very well taken point. In the aggregate, we needed our reward structures. If we want to do this, we can't make chumps out of people.
So as a research university that has these threefold mission with research and graduate education, scholarship and graduate education, and undergraduate education linked together, I think we should be looking for faculty that do all three really well. This is a very unique place. This is at the top of public flagship universities that are research universities. I don't find them goals that are in conflict. I can say after 5, almost 6 years here at UT Austin, this campus and this faculty value undergraduate education a lot more than another good university that I spent quite a bit of time at. And it is actually very impressive, the dedication faculty have here and the leadership have towards undergraduate education. And I think that's really what I'd like to see is how do we better integrate that with our graduate education mission. Now, on the MOOCs that both you and Michael had worked on, that model is unsustainable. We cannot have faculty devoting that much time in our current business structure. Our structure was never designed for these kind of very intensive upfront investments that have great benefits, as you've both articulated. We don't make any money on those. So part of the principles document that Bill had is we have to make this sustainable. And I didn't want to turn this talk into sort of the business aspect. That's something we do have to worry about in the provost office. But let's figure out what is the right thing we should be doing. And there will certainly need to be changes in how we operate if we're contemplating these kind of changes in undergraduate education. And let me just say one final word about lecturers, our non-tenure track faculty. They are very crucial to our education mission. And this is a conversation I've been having with deans in particular. We need to have non-tenure track faculty part of this educational mission. And the compensation in some of the departments and colleges just doesn't make any sense at the important role non-tenure track faculty play. And we need to work on that problem also. Let's try to move around the room. Yes, over here.
This is just, I'm Philip Barish, English department. This is just a quick suggestion, maybe a not very expensive, but potentially high profile way of rewarding some of the kind of innovation in undergraduate curriculum that you're talking about, which is that we have a number of wonderful teaching awards on campus, which I think are a substantive way in which good teaching is recognized and rewarded. I may be wrong and I don't know about all of them, but as far as I know, there don't exist any that are specifically focused on innovation. Innovation in teaching, innovative models of teaching, innovative curriculum development, innovative tools, and that might be a way of drawing some attention to and giving some kind of recognition to. Kind of as a follow-up on that, we were, I'm in the English department, we were one of the early departments that was part of the course transformation program. And we noted some fantastic things have been developed by our colleagues in other departments. We're pretty proud of some of what we've developed. I would like to see some mechanism for sharing more broadly what our colleagues are developing. So I'd like to know what kinds of innovative things people are developing. Again, there may be some mechanisms that are in place. I know CTL does some of that. Those are just two thoughts.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And in fact, with some of the changes we're looking at in CTL, we want to do exactly that. We have some new innovation grants that are going out. I don't know if those have been announced yet, but we will be doing those on a regular cycle. But that's a great idea, an award that not just recognizes high quality teaching, but recognizes faculty and perhaps groups of faculty that are working on transformations that really make a difference in undergraduate education.
Yeah, I think those grants are great. This would be. I think those grants are great. This would be specifically after something.
You're talking about
that's
an award. Yeah, no, I
exactly.
understand that. Yeah, sort of the Academy Awards of teaching innovation. Yes. Yeah.
I'm Deborah Beck in the Classics Department, and I wanted to comment briefly on part of your PowerPoint where one of the your 4 components, and the first one was knowledge. I wanted to say a little bit about what I see as the components of a course, because it seemed to me that that diagram was about, okay, here's the course, and then here's a lot of other stuff that goes on around the course, beyond the course, whatever. I think a course is about, it's useful to divide up knowledge into smaller categories. So a course includes knowledge. I'm communicating information to my students, but it also, and perhaps even more importantly, includes skills development and modeling. Skills are things like, critical reading, quality writing, and modeling is how do you present an argument, me, the professor, not the textbook. How do I respond to people with whom I disagree? How do I act when I'm wrong? There are different parts of those 3 things. They balance out differently in different disciplines. Some disciplines' introductory curriculum is almost entirely about information. Other departments' introductory curriculum includes a lot of skill building and a lot more modeling. And I think it's really important both for ordinary current teaching and also for thinking about how we transform our courses to be clear in our own minds about the balance in each of our courses and in our curriculum overall among knowledge, sort of information, skills, and modeling, because some of those things work really well with technology and with all these kinds of different innovations that we're talking about, and others really don't work at all. And as someone who really thinks a lot about skill building and modeling, which I think don't always work very well, with technology taking the place of face-to-face technologies. I want to make sure that we're all thinking about those things partly in relation to disciplines with which we're not as familiar as we are with our own, where those balances may come out very, very differently. And also, at different points in the curriculum of our own department, those things are going to be different. So in certain parts of our own curriculums, different kinds of innovations are going to make sense in different places. And I also want to make sure that we're protecting the parts of what we do that just don't work very well with these kinds of technologies. One of the things that I really appreciate is saying, we're not just going to say, okay, technology is great, let's make everything technological and let's be innovative whether or not that's actually helping the students learn. I want to make sure that we're thinking about that at the level of what are our courses supposed to convey, not only information, but other kinds of things as well, and how can we make all of those things thrive at the same time as we're doing all this other stuff.
I think the comments and the thoughts have been terrific, including this one. First of all, just the modeling, I think, is underappreciated and a very important part of what we do, including the character building. How we treat our students, as you said, if you make a mistake, rather than try and weasel your way out, these are smart kids, right? So I think a lot of what you said is there's a lot there, and it's important. I think it's also important that it's not as though in this course we're going to teach knowledge, in this experience we're going to teach skills, right? It gets integrated. And one thing that we need to protect against, Greg and I do, but all of us, when people come forward and say, we ought to be spending a lot of energy thinking through this and solving some of these challenges, it can come across as, oh, y'all haven't thought about this and people aren't doing it and whatever. As Greg said, I think this campus, both in individual courses and across the board, really is way ahead of the game. Doesn't mean we can't do more. The caution I'd like to throw out, and I've kind of been in the middle of this. This debate started by saying there's a new, well, I want to say one other thing. It's not just technological innovation. I think and hope a lot of this will be well beyond technological innovation in how we think about the whole package our undergraduates get. I think there will be things we can do now along those lines that technology may enable us to do that we couldn't do before. But I think you're right. It's not just technological innovation. But the debate started. We've got this technology. Bad universities, why aren't they just doing it a totally different way? And that's a classic throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that's a lot of the point you're making. I think we need to be very, very careful about that. It is easy to get in love with the new way and forget that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's why I say the debate, and I've tried to help form this nationally and throughout the state, it is a false dichotomy to say we're going to go the technology way or the old way. We ought to be very careful, and that's why I say think through how in some areas, I think we'll find out many things we do. We can do them better, consistent with the soul of research residential universities. I could not agree more. We have to be very careful not to do what you're afraid of doing. But we can only do that. We cannot do that in the tower. You can do it in the classics department and in your own classes. That's why we need to, one thing we can do is try to drive this discussion down into the departments. So these kinds of questions that you're talking about can get addressed by people who know what they're doing, as opposed to people that are sitting around a conference table in the tower.
So I think that's exactly the kind of analysis that I know you do in your courses, that all faculty do. That is the value that we provide to our students. But I'd like to actually extend that and really make a challenge. That kind of analysis should apply to the degree program too, not just the course.
Yeah.
So how does this course and what you're doing in your course, how does that relate to another required course, to the set of electives students might have in the major, so that we can provide our students, as they're taking these pathways, some of which are pretty complex, that at the end, when they graduate, they've had that right balance, not just in each individual course, but in the entire curriculum.
Can I make just one other comment? You're raising a very core issue here. I do not think it is irrational at all to say, we're here, we'd rather be here, but once we go down that path, people will fall in love with the technology and we'll end up being the University of Phoenix, right, or something like that. In other words, the change takes place in a real sociological world. I do hope we don't succumb to that. That is, the fact that there could be some changes, and I agree fully, in the degree program, the elective program, right? As I said earlier, it's an ecosystem of all the experiences they're getting. But I hope we'll have the courage to say we can make it better without having throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay, yes. Can't see who that is. Is that Uri?
Uri.
Uri?
Uri Treisman from Mathematics and Public Affairs. So I hear my mother's voice in my head, you can never worry enough.
Yeah,
See, you've presented
I
some
get it.
terrifying data. 80,000 courses transferred in. They're probably the cheapest courses to offer. So our courses are getting much more expensive to offer. They're probably low-income students disproportionately who transfer in. It seems like, and 62% of our students have taken courses elsewhere. So in effect, we now have really a shared responsibility for educating students. It's not just a self-contained population that we have. So I wonder, as a flagship institution, do we have a special responsibility to raise the quality of those courses at our sister institutions? And are there mechanisms for doing that you're working on?
Unequivocally, I think the answer is yes, we do. And the statewide coalition that we're in, where we work with community colleges and regional universities, about 14 of them. Is that right, Harrison? And we're not working with every community college across the country, across the state. But yes, I think the dual credit courses, the courses that students who start in community colleges and then go to four-year colleges, we ought to be working to make sure those are high-quality courses, and the answer is yes, we're working on them. I think we have a responsibility, but one of the things we also need to recognize is the community colleges sometimes are better than we are at doing some of this stuff. So I think we have a responsibility together to make that now multi-institutional ecosystem work better. Because if we are, in that sense that you're describing, co-educating our students, so we ought to be working with them to, and very often the problem is we don't convey our expectations for upper level courses, and they're shooting in the dark in the community colleges or the place that it's being transferred from. Now, if somebody's taking a course from some out-of-state online, and the law says we have to bring it in, you can't work with everybody. But the community college in Texas, absolutely, we ought to be working with. And Uri, your Mathways project is an example of how pathways, it's not the individual course, but pathways through the university, right, is calculus really the right pathway for every student in the university? It's not now, but I think those kinds of questions that are not in the individual course, but in these pathways through the university, I think are going to be equally important, maybe more important, in how we innovate.
So let's take one more question, and then we're going to finish up since we're a little over time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for holding this forum. It's so interesting, and I've been worried about these issues for years. So I wanted to speak to...
You're in what?
Oh, my name's Hina Azam, and I'm in Middle Eastern Studies, Islamic Studies.
Yeah.
So I wanted to speak to the sort of political climate and this challenge to the value of education, higher education, particularly the humanities, where there's sort of apparently less value to what we do. One of the things that was ironic, sarcastic. And one of the things I wanted to just sort of throw out there is the value or the potential value of undergraduates as our best ally in fighting this fight. I find that most of my students, and this is just my experience, I can't speak to others, but certainly in my experience in the humanities, most of my students really have no idea what the university really is. They don't understand what a professor actually is. They don't understand what a PhD is. I'm always being called Mrs. Azam, and it's kind of tiring. You know, so one of the things I really have tried to do is spend time explaining to students, you know, what is it that we're doing, and that speaks to research. It speaks to the public mission of the university. It speaks to the importance of critical thinking and writing and all of these things. And it becomes a way for students to really understand and become invested in the university as a whole, and to understand why it's important that there be classes that they may never take. And so I think that would be, I mean, they're the ones who are going to be our ambassadors. They're going to take, you know, what they learn here in terms of our value out to their jobs, to their families. They're going to vote. You know, there's like just so much there. And so I just wanted to speak to that and kind of throw that out there.
I just have two thoughts, and you may want to close. And on the students being our ambassadors and the political debate, I'm not going to talk a lot about the political debate here, but even when it comes to tuition or whatever, if our students and their families are our allies in this, they get that they've got something special here. It can be better, but that they do have something special here. So I agree with that. And the students have been fabulous in this. On the other point you're making, what are we doing? When we teach classes, and when I taught law classes, I'd very often ask the question, why would I ask you that question? And have them talk about that for a bit. We tend, like most people with a craft, to build a scaffolding. So we're thinking, you were talking about what you want to get in the class. So you're thinking about that. So you build that scaffolding, construct the class, give those experiences, and then, but you take the scaffolding away. Where the question, why would we be spending 3 days looking at this? And the students talk about it a little. And then you talk about, it's not that I care that you know what happened, I don't know whether it's history or sociology or culture and Islamic studies, but a part of the Quran or whatever. It's not that I want you to memorize that. It's I want you to see how this structure of literature works, or that talking about what we're doing, sort of meta teaching, I think we do way too little of. And not only don't the students get what the university is about in the more political sense, they actually don't get, they're not learning as well, okay, I get why we're doing this, and it emphasizes sort of the metastructure of what you're trying to do. I think just as individual teaching, what you're saying, in addition to having an effect on the overall structure, is a very, very critical point.
Okay, on that note, I'd like to call this session to a conclusion. I want to thank everybody for being here, and you're all busy with all the things you're doing and teaching, and with your students and your research and scholarship and everything else that you're helping with the university. But this is really fundamental to what we do and critical for our future. So I look forward to your continued participation. Please talk with your colleagues about this and spread the word. You're great ambassadors for some of the important discussion that we've had today. And so we hope that this builds from this kickoff. As you can see on the screen, we've got 2 other sessions coming up in March and April. 2 in March, 1 in April, and then the symposium in May. And we'll get some information out as a follow-up to all the faculty. I think we can distribute the slides and some more information about just this process and ways of getting input, and whether we need to have focus groups or other mechanisms to be able to gather the input. We'll continue to work on that. But thank you very much. I've learned a lot in thinking about as we prepare for this, and just sitting here for an hour and a half or so with this discussion. So thank you, and we have some refreshments in the back, and we'll keep talking.